The story begins with an exhausted girl with doll-like eyes talking to someone. The person asks if she remembers what her mother told her. Her mother had said that if she sleeps too long, a scary demon might take her to the dream world forever. But the truth is they are not scary beings. It's only natural that there's darkness when there's light. There's no need to shun them. The head to the crow, the left arm to the fly, the right arm to the wolf, the left after the scorpion, the right next to the donkey, and the torso to the lion, king of the underworld who rules over all ignorance, corruption, greed, famine, hatred, and anger. May you find the last heart you lost. As she says all this, she holds a dagger over her daughter's heart. She declares that his servants seek atonement. The deed is done. There is only one thing she desperately wants. She wants her daughter, who she just ended, to sit on the most noble seat in the land. Later, her daughter is awakened, but her eyes are red as crimson. Laxalam's second prince, Ibland, was born between the king and his mistress and met an early end. But he was resurrected by his biological mother, Madame Kriemhild. Upon his resurrection, he opens the door to the stormy sky, horrors before him. Yet his eyes remain red as crimson, emotionless yet beautiful. Sometime later, in a village, a young boy glances at a beautiful girl laughing with her friends. Noticing this, a boy nearby exclaims that he should ask her out and calls over the girl, Marietta. He informs her that Jack wants to talk to her. Jack grabs his collar and tells him to stop, but she's already arrived. "What is it?" she asks. He fidgets nervously as his face turns red, struggling to form his words, while his friend simply leans back and watches. Jack nervously laughs, admitting that he was wondering if she wanted to go for a walk together later. However, Marietta apologizes, explaining that she told Hennefin's sister she'd play with her this afternoon, so she won't have any time. Jack nervously laughs again, saying that's too bad. Marietta realizes she's late and hurries off, remembering she told her mom she would do the laundry before coming home. She quickly leaves Jack behind. Not long after, under a large tree, a man gently holds her face as she blushes. He seems to be a player, as he simply removes a leaf, yet all the girls are nervous and shy around him. Abel waved goodbye, the girls then blushed like schoolgirls. Jack questioned if girls really like pretty boys like him. His friends comment that they don't know what they see in him since he looks so weak, but they admit he is good-looking. They grumble that, thanks to him, girls don't even look at them anymore. This man, who has been taking all the ladies' attention, has garnered their anger. He is known as Abel. Ever since Abel came to the village 6 years ago, the village boys, including Jack, have been totally ignored. Jack believes that if it weren't for Joanna, Abel would have ended up as food for scavengers long ago. He wishes he had. After all, no one knows where Abel came from. As Abel passes by, he glances at the boys, making them nervous. They whisper, wondering if he overheard them and what they should do. But one of them reassures the group, saying, "What will he do about it? Even if he did?" Abel merely smiles gently at them, with no hatred in his eyes. The boys question if he just smiled at them but grudgingly admit once again that he really is handsome. However, Jack believes Abel was definitely laughing at him and starts plotting how to teach him a lesson. Late at night, Jack overhears someone discussing livestock going missing. The person suggests that it must be a villager or the guards behind it, and that everyone needs to be more careful. A new calf was born a few days ago. It's become quite dangerous in the village these days. Upon arriving home, Jack is greeted by his granny, who he thought was sleeping. She tells him not to wander around after the sun sets and to come straight home. He tells her yes, but then realizes this is the chance he's been waiting for. He slowly exits his home with a creak from the door, then rushes out at top speed in the middle of the night. According to the adults, they haven't been able to find the culprit. The guards have been standing watch for days, but the village remains tense. People are convinced it's an inside job, and Jack believes Abel may be behind the trouble. He plans to cover Abel's work boots in chicken remains, and everyone will hate him when they see him tomorrow morning. Suddenly, a dog barks at him. It's his favorite dog, Mary. He bends down to pet her and questions what's suddenly gotten into her. At that moment, he hears an ominous slurping noise that sends chills down his spine. He wonders if the barn door was open. He could have sworn it was locked earlier. He remembers the calf was born recently, so his mother had been extra careful. but he notices someone inside. Scared, Jack calls out in a low voice, "Who's there?" Keeping his distance as his dog shakes behind him. He questions what someone is doing in someone else's barn this late at night. When the person doesn't respond, Jack angrily approaches, vowing to call for help. Suddenly, he hears a strange crunching noise that terrifies him. To his horror, he sees something unimaginable, so terrifying that he's scarred for life. He calls for his mother, screaming her name. He's then brought back to reality, with people commenting that he's been staring off into space ever since he fainted the other day. His friends tell him they've thought of a way to mess with Abel, confident that even Abel will fall for it. But when Jack hears Abel's name, he's terrified, flashing back to that night in the barn. He springs up and tells his friends that he's okay and doesn't want to be part of their plan. They're confused, as Jack used to hate Abel the most. Jack insists that they forget about it, saying he doesn't care anymore, which only confuses them further. His friends laugh, teasing him that their plan must have been too scary for him. They joke that no real man faints from seeing laundry hanging in a barn. Jack insists that he was just tired. Watching from the side, Jonathan smirks. His friends start fighting, but Jonathan declares that if Jack won't go through with it, then they shouldn't either, since they don't have it in for Abel like Jack does. Jonathan later tells them he's glad Jack is back to normal. He had thought something terrible might have happened that day, but he's happy that both Jack and the livestock are safe. Meanwhile, Abel stares through a window, smirking. A woman calls for him, asking if something good happened since he seems to be enjoying himself today. Abel replies that he always does. She informs him that she washed his dirty clothes, though her eyes are red. Abel exclaims that he was running out of things to wear and thanks her. "This boy before you is a demon, the most evil entity that lurks beneath the ground. Demons aren't supposed to get involved in matters above ground, but once in a while, they answer the call of humans. They take form above ground in exchange for fulfilling a person's wish, in return for a sacrifice. Belial, the seventh king of hell, must become the most noble being on earth while possessing the body of a girl of lowly descent. The king's seventh mistress was a pagan and a servant. The king loved her enough to give her the late palace, the most beautiful palace in Altir, but he could not stop the queen's knights from stabbing her and her child, just like they had stabbed the last 6 mistresses. He thought she'd just live as a victim, but she did something very interesting. She fooled him into thinking the girl was actually a prince. The next day, the village girls greet Abel and ask if there's anything he needs or if he'd like to have lunch with them later. Abel smiles and tells them it's okay, thanking them for asking. It's been 6 years since he came to the village, and thanks to his good looks, he settled in quickly. But looks are just a double-edged sword for a girl with no power. It's better to pretend to be a guy than to get knocked up by some surf or become a victim of a witch hunt. And muscular man asks if Abel is busy. Abel says it's okay and asks what's wrong. The man tells him that no one is available right now and asks if Abel can ask Henry when it's their turn. Abel contemplates that the old man is probably making stone powder to mix into their grains again, trying to swindle extra. While walking away, Jack and Abel make eye contact. Jack quickly walks away, unable to stand the sight of Abel first thing in the morning. Abel smirks, informing him that Marietta is nearby the well. He questions why he's telling him this, but immediately Jack becomes angry and blushes, telling Abel that it's none of his business. Abel then mentions the time Jack fainted, scaring Jack to his core. Jack tells Abel to stop with the nonsense and that he has things to do, so he needs to go home. As a result, Jack quickly runs away as Abel simply smiles. However, that's not the way to Jack's home. It's not perfect, but Abel can feel his power returning, although he had to eat 4 disgusting animals for that. It's interesting how Jack lost part of his memory but is still hostile toward Abel. It's because Abel hasn't been to the surface in a long while, but it seems humans are cuter than he remembered them to be. He promised to make this host a king, which may be easier to keep than expected. Later, a guy tells Abel that after grinding for his lordship and the priest, he's become an expert at what he's doing. So, if he understands, Abel should get lost. Abel smiles and tells them it's coming very late this year, so everyone's curious. Abel inquires if the grain he's grinding is for the castle. He reveals that Patrick has been on his back since this morning. However, here Abel's happy facade immediately falters when Henry continues. He's asked Patrick so many times to look after his son, but all he could be was Master Edwin's whipping boy. Abel glares at him with unreadable eyes. The man continues that when he becomes a free man, a mere countryside knight will not be. Immediately he stops and tells Abel to pretend not to hear that. Abel tells him, of course, but questions when it will really be their turn. Suddenly, the man notices a strange creaking noise coming from a pipe. As he leaves to check on it, Abel smiles. Afterwards, Abel stares at the equipment. He picks up a bucket with some dirt and pebbles and throws it into the grain grinder. When he's done, he tells Henry that he'll be leaving now. He slowly closes the door and tells him goodbye with a smile. As Abel passed by Patrick, he gets the feeling that they'll be seeing each other soon. Later, the man makes his way to Abel's home. His mother tells him that she'll talk him, so he should go to his room. However, he touches the hem of her dress and tells her that he has come to see him. With a horrified expression, she tries to retort. Her eyes are red, and she is breathing heavily as well. He tells her he knows what she's worried about, but it's okay, so she should wait inside. He then whispers something in her ear, but that causes a smirk to appear on his face. After a few moments, he meets the man, who comments that Abel seems close to his mother. He apologizes, explaining that his mother is fragile. He lowers his head and explains that she was rude to the man because she did not recognize that he was from the castle, due to her humble background. So he apologizes on her behalf. The man seems surprised by Abel's courteous behavior. Patrick questions who his father is, but Abel tells him that he died 6 years ago. However, Abel talks as if he's speaking about someone else's father. He reveals that it happened before his mother took him in, so he doesn't know the details. But Patrick contemplates that they seem hardly close, thinking it might be because he was adopted. The man asks Abel's age, and Abel reveals that his mother believes he's around 14 years old. Suddenly, the man glances at the boy, noticing something. He comments that Abel has a well-balanced body and asks how he feels about working at the castle. Abel is shocked, and his devilish side appears for a moment. The man reveals that Master Edwin needs a whipping boy. Abel questions how he could, since he's not educated and he's slow. The man explains that it's nothing hard. Abel just has to stand next to the young master during his lessons. However, Abel hesitates. He questions if Patrick will give him time to think about it. This seems to irritate the man slightly, as he doesn't understand that this is a great opportunity. He inquires what Abel is so worried about. Abel nervously explains that this might be rude, but he heard that the young master has a foul temper. The man comments that the young master is just a bit immature. However, Abel worries that an orphan like him might not be good enough for the master. He adds that he's not afraid to be whipped, but if he ends up becoming disabled, who will take care of his mother? The man begins laughing, causing Abel's face to turn red. He comments that Abel seems very scared already, but reassures him not to worry as Master Edwin isn't stupid. He'll only be whipped when he gives a wrong answer. Abel lowers his head and apologizes. The man smiles, thinking Abel is like a typical proud young man. He assures Abel that if his wound is bad, he'll lend him some medicine they use in the night order. As a result, Abel lowers his head and declares that he knows he has a lot to learn, but he will strive to serve with all his heart. The man gives Abel the time he needs to arrive at the castle, but Abel doesn't have a problem with being a whipping boy as there's nothing on this land that can harm him. Only the ones above can harm him. When Abel meets the young master, Edwin questions who the pretty boy is, commenting on how dirty he looks. Edwin tells Abel to change, saying it's embarrassing to take him along like that. The butler tells Edwin that he's very generous, which is as expected from the next baron. Edwin responds, "Of course, I am a merciful leader. If it had been any other noble, they would not have shown any mercy." Abel thanks Edwin for his generosity and vows to serve such a kind master, which catches everyone's attention. Abel smiles and announces that he will do his very best not to cause trouble for someone so valuable. This satisfies Edwin's ego, and the butler realizes that Abel is very quick-witted. No wonder Patrick was praising him. Outside, the butler explains that in the morning, Edwin will have sword lessons with Sir Patrick, and in the afternoon, Lord Campbell will give him lessons. Abel will attend lessons with Edwin starting this afternoon. If he has any questions, he can ask the maids. The butler introduces Abel as Edwin's whipping boy and orders the maid to give him a tour of the castle, feed him lunch, and then send him to Master Edwin's room. The butler stutters as he attempts to talk about Edwin's father. He avoids Abel's gaze nervously, while the maid is anxious and fidgets. The butler dismisses the maid, and she raises her head relieved. Abel wonders if they are embarrassed about their master, and he's surprised they would treat a baron that way who owns an estate. Maybe he'll meet the owner of the estate soon. Meanwhile, in the baron's room, Edwin mumbles that something is coming, and he has to hide. If he doesn't, he'll be eaten. He knows there's something in his homeland, something that isn't human. In the next moment, we see a sword pointed at Abel's neck. Patrick orders Edwin to put down the sword. Abel glances at him with an annoyed expression. Patrick then announces that Edwin should also put down his weapon, which causes Edwin to flinch. Edwin declares that it's been a year, yet he hasn't been able to even touch the handle of a sword. It's ridiculous. When will he become a knight at this rate? It's not like he's lacking in something. The very fact that he hasn't done any of this infuriates him so much that his face turns purple. Suddenly, he throws his sword to the ground and begins stomping on it. This makes Patrick stare at him with a cold expression, sending a chill down Edwin's spine. Patrick questions if Master Edwin remembers how he was taught to treat the sword. Edwin grows silent, and Patrick explains that it should be treated like a part of his own body. Patrick fears what will happen if Edwin handles a sword in his current state. As a result, Patrick punishes Edwin by making him do 7 laps on the training ground. Although it was usually 5, Edwin talked back, so Patrick orders him to do 8 laps instead. Immediately, Edwin begins running at full speed. Patrick then orders Abel to run 7 laps. Abel is surprised and points at himself, but Edwin laments that he is the baron's only child and heir to the Baymont estate, and he is in a very bad state. Edwin is a distracted young master, not stupid but only interested in swordsmanship. The person who disapproves of him the most is Campbell Latwin, Edwin's tutor. Campbell is a man with a ponytail, a stern expression, and glasses. According to rumors, Campbell is quiet and incredibly intelligent. He even got his master's degree from Salisbury, the city of universities. If he wasn't the 3rd son, he would have inherited the Viscounty title. It's quite a pity. As Campbell lectures Edwin on very important information, Edwin begins yawning, then falls asleep, drooling on his book. This angers Campbell, and he questions what he had just said. Immediately, Edwin tells him exactly what he said, and Campbell has no choice but to tell him, "That's good, but you need to focus on the lesson more." Abel ponders why the son of a viscount with a master's degree would work as a tutor in a countryside like this. He comes to the conclusion it must be because of money, and Campbell must be very unhappy. They were supposed to be studying logic, yet they are discussing religion. Campbell explains that logic was started to prove the teachings of the one above all logic, who is the sky, the light and order, so it's only natural that would have close relationships with theology. Edwin questions why Campbell refers to them as the sky's light, instead of using their real name. Campbell tells him that the real name should not be spoken so lightly. It's the same with both gods and demons. One never knows what might happen. As he says this, Abel's face becomes somber as he stares at the sun. Edwin asks further questions, but Abel suggests they end the lesson for the day, promising they'll go over geometry tomorrow. Edwin tries to question him about a demon's real name, but Campbell has already left. However, Abel knows that even if he were aware of such a thing, he would never mention it, as knowing could lead to accusations of heresy. Edwin, calling for Abel, notices Abel's downcast expression and assumes it's because the topics they were discussing were too difficult for him to understand. Edwin comments that it's only natural. It's a miracle that a commoner like Abel is even here. Edwin smirks as Abel thanks him for the opportunity. But Abel continues to muse, thinking to himself that logic and theology are just elaborate excuses for those who are weak. There's no need for such things if you can fight with a sword. At least that's what Abel believes. He smiles because Edwin has no idea what really lurks in the world. Later, Patrick trains the two, telling them that the tips of their feet and knees should not tilt. This is their punishment for touching the sword without permission 2 days in a row. Patrick tells them if they want to hold a sword so badly, they can do as they wish, but he will increase the weight after 2 weeks to train them properly. Meanwhile, as Edwin trembles, he tells Abel that he should give up, thinking Abel wants to give up too. Edwin believes that if Abel gives up, Patrick might go easier on them. However, Abel smiles warmly and seems fine, showing none of the signs of exhaustion Edwin expected. Unlike other commoners, when their legs were exposed, Abel did not need to be whipped on the military training ground. Patrick didn't punish them with whips. Instead, they were punished with rigorous training. After finishing the exhausting training, Abel threw up. Edwin commented on how dirty Abel looked, calling him fragile and saying he was not good for anything. However, with trembling legs, Abel stood back up. Edwin continued to claim that Patrick didn't expect anything from Abel anyway, but the boy knew that this training, which felt like punishment, was the best way to improve his weak body as autumn set in and the air grew colder, signaling the start of ridding the castle grounds of fallen leaves. A special event began. Edwin and Abel were racing. This was their 9th lap. Edwin, using all his might, pushed himself to surpass Abel. But despite his efforts, the boy was no match for Edwin. People were surprised Abel hadn't collapsed. Edwin had wanted to be a knight ever since he was young, so it felt horrific to make a common servant boy endure the same hard training. A group of knights commented on how Abel looked like a girl, laughing and saying he would soon be crying in his mother's arms. For a few days, the soldiers mocked Abel as they passed by, but after a while, things began to change. The soldiers noticed there wasn't much more to see, as they had already predicted the outcome. As Edwin struggled to keep going, he became angry, not wanting to lose to a common farm boy, so he pushed himself even harder and finally won. Abel smiled and congratulated Master Edwin on his victory, but this drew the attention of Patrick and the other knights. They noted how Abel didn't look like someone who had just run around the entire castle, leading them to suspect that he had lost on purpose. They pondered this but knew they could never voice such suspicions due to the difference in their statuses. But what else is there besides the difference in status? Training wasn't the only thing that changed. In Campbell's class, Abel began to speak up more, surprising Campbell with his understanding. When Campbell asked which volume a particular poem appeared in, Abel correctly identified volume 27, just after the chapter on statements. However, Campbell had been referring to the chapter on arguments. When Campbell inquired why Abel emphasized an emotional reaction, Abel explained that masses don't always behave as expected. Arguments, logic, and grounds give credibility, but personal favorability and hostility also influence the judgment of the audience. Campbell was shocked by Abel's understanding, but quick in his calculations, went to the Baroness and suggested including Abel in the lessons. The Baroness did not initially welcome the suggestion of including the whipping boy in lessons, but Campbell persuaded her by arguing that Abel, a land servant, could become useful to them. He also mentioned that Abel was very handsome, which piqued her interest. In the capital, it was common to have beautiful children with them for the sake of dignity. Campbell, however, stressed that he didn't believe she was lesser in class. She commented that Campbell must really want Abel in the lessons, but she too wanted to see him. However, Campbell was aware that both she and her son looked down on teachers. After the Baroness met Abel, an additional desk was added to the room, and the whipping boy was given a book. Edwin, who harbored childish dreams of becoming a war hero, didn't notice the dark forces creeping toward the castle. Meanwhile, Patrick thought something was strange. Abel had been brought in as a mere stand-in, yet the difference in talent was astonishing. However, Patrick believed he was overthinking things, telling himself that it didn't matter how talented a serf was. His focus was on helping Master Edwin grow. As he thought this, Abel watched from above, remarking that he was a little hurt by Patrick's words, as Patrick was his teacher. As Patrick trained, Abel observed everything, learning with incredible accuracy. He wished to become stronger. Stronger even than Patrick. Time passed quickly, and with the arrival of spring, the branches that had once wilted were now covered with green leaves. Despite his bones not having finished growing, Abel's elegant writing was apparent. Campbell commented that Abel's elegance was remarkable, even though he wasn't officially his student. Abel had the potential to be the most talented student Campbell had ever taught. If Abel had been born into a middle-class family, Campbell could proudly call him his student. Even in terms of appearance, Abel was more graceful than anyone else. It would have been better if he had been a free man. Meanwhile, the free city had been expanding rapidly due to an increase in trade and commerce. There were no landlords, no rulers, and no class hierarchies there. Some serfs dreamed of being free in the city, but most didn't have the money to buy their freedom from their feudal lords, so they remained in servitude forever. Campbell disliked people who didn't know their place and merely longed for freedom, but he thought it would be a waste of talent for a genius like Abel to stay in the countryside. In the next scene, it was approaching October. It was the day Edwin would be given a fully grown horse. After much whining and begging, finally he'll say goodbye to that pony. His face turns red as he attempts to touch the horse. Then Abel appears, startling him. He informed Edwin that the Baroness is calling for him. He questioned why Abel is delivering the message, but Abel just comments she asked him to take care of him. He then comments that the horse is a good horse. Edwin reveals that next month he'll be 15 and he'll receive the horse as a gift. Abel tells him he's amazing as many people get theirs much later. Edwin questions how could he know this, since he's never been out of Baymon. Abel just exclaims that Campbell told him. Upon saying this, Edwin realized that not just Campbell but also the maids are nuts about him. The servants and soldiers used to look down on him for being weak, but that has changed. Even his mother has seen him differently. Abel questions if he will use it for the military. Edwin tells him yes, if he ever goes to war. Hearing this, Abel quickly becomes uninterested. Edwin questions Abel's reaction, asking if he thinks he will never go to war. Abel claims, "Of course not. There is no one else who would make a better knight." However, upon hearing these words, Edwin exclaims, "It's just what?" Abel smirks, knowing that Edwin is falling into his trap, and declares that he is worried because Edwin has still never held a sword. This makes Edwin angry, and he questions whether Abel is truly worried about him. Edwin feels offended but cannot think of anything to say. The whipping boy had struck a nerve. Edwin stomps angrily past Abel, demanding, "When will I get my real sword? I'm going to deal with this today." The provocation was successful. Moments later, Edwin declares that he refuses to run laps around the castle anymore. He demands to be taught how to use a real sword. Patrick comments that he thought it had been too quiet lately. He knows that Edwin is a spoiled child, but how can he behave worse than a servant? Patrick is annoyed, and his head begins to throb. He tells Edwin, as he has before, that it's too soon for him, as his bones are still growing. Edwin interrupts, telling Patrick to stop using that excuse, asking, "Would you be satisfied only when I'm older, when my bones are fully grown?" Edwin shouts that Patrick is just making excuses and looking down on him because his father retired in disgrace. This hits a nerve, and Patrick, in a dangerous tone, tells Edwin to be careful of what he says. Edwin questions who Patrick thinks he's talking to, as Patrick draws his sword from its sheath. However, Edwin boldly declares that he will one day be Patrick's master. Not too long after, Edwin holds a sword in his hands, and Patrick instructs him to hold it properly with both hands. Patrick tells Edwin that he will only attack once. If Edwin can block this attack, Patrick will follow his every order from that moment on and will teach him how to use a sword, as Edwin wished. Patrick will give Edwin as much time as he needs to prepare. However, Edwin, still angry and not thinking clearly, declares that he doesn't need any time to prepare. Patrick warns him not to regret this decision and counts to 3. 1, 2, 3. Patrick's assault comes swiftly, his sword swinging rapidly through the air. Edwin fails to block the attack and is left injured. Patrick asks if Edwin admits defeat. Patrick ponders if he should have gone easier on Edwin, as he is still just an amateur. It wasn't honorable of him to be so harsh. Suddenly, Abel questions if he could challenge Patrick on behalf of his master, Edwin. Edwin is surprised, but Abel asks if he would be allowed to defend Edwin's honor. Edwin, still upset by the situation, questions how someone like Abel could defend his honor when he couldn't defend it himself. Abel calmly asks if, should he win, Patrick will obey his orders as well. Patrick coldly declares that Abel is crossing the line, but he throws a sword toward Abel, telling him to pick it up. Edwin is scared for Abel, believing that if he couldn't block the attack, Abel surely cannot either. Patrick pledges the same terms. If Abel can block the attack, he will obey his every command. However, Patrick plans to take Abel's arm, reasoning that he will still be able to live even if he loses one. Patrick views Abel as conceited, thinking that because he's been in the castle for only a few months, he believes he can take on someone like him. Patrick counts to 3 again, but Abel tells him there's no need. This enrages Patrick further, his eyes void of compassion. Patrick warns Abel that he will regret this. Abel, however, insists that he is ready. To Patrick's surprise, Abel's stance is unexpectedly solid. He seems prepared in a way Patrick didn't expect. Suddenly, the clash of swords echoes through the air, and even Edwin is shocked. Patrick, too, cannot believe what he is seeing. Abel had blocked his attack, and Patrick had definitely aimed for the arm. Abel smirks and asks if Patrick admits defeat. Patrick's heart races, unable to comprehend what just happened. He is reminded of the battle where he faced an army of enemies, a moment when he lost his composure. He seems to lose his mind again and swings at Abel to finish him. However, a knight blocks the attack swiftly. Upon seeing this, even Abel is uneasy. The knight questions what Sir Patrick is doing, wondering how he could attack a kid who hasn't even been knighted, as though he intended to kill him. The White Hawk Knights are renowned as the bravest knights in the temple and faithful monks, also serving as soldiers on the front lines of the holy ground. Geoffrey Baymon, Baron of Loxalam's northeast domains, never thought a holy knight would travel all the way to his region. Priest Baldwin, a priest from the temple, exclaims that they work tirelessly to protect the priests and the land. The young man with them is Sir Lawrence, a holy knight from the temple, regarded as a genius with a promising future. Lawrence had met Geoffrey 10 years ago, and Lawrence wishes him happiness and blessings as they celebrate his son's birthday. Later, reflecting on the incident, Patrick pondered why he felt the need to end Abel's life. Was it because Abel seemed arrogant, or because he was provoked so easily? Patrick cannot believe that he attacked a boy who hadn't even been knighted so fiercely. Lawrence, noticing something wrong, asks Patrick if he is okay, but Patrick assures him he's fine. Lawrence, younger and more formal, admits he saw Patrick fight in the Battle of Talon and was inspired to become a knight because of him. Patrick brushes it off, saying he's just an old countryside knight now, but Lawrence believes he could still defeat many enemies with ease. Lawrence then questions whether the Baymon household has 2 sons, as he doesn't recognize Abel. Patrick reveals that Abel isn't a noble but just a whipping boy, which surprises Lawrence. Lawrence, feeling embarrassed, realizes that he had made a mistake in interrupting what he thought was a lesson, only to find out it was a punishment for a servant. Meanwhile, Abel is frustrated. Not only was he unable to demonstrate his true sword skills, but he also attracted unnecessary attention. A random inspection from a temple knight had made things worse. Abel is especially wary of Lawrence, whose senses are sharp. Abel knows he hasn't regained his full strength yet, and it would be dangerous to draw the attention of the temple. At that moment, Michelle questions if something happened to Abel, while the other maids watch from behind the walls. Abel tells her that he thinks the barley bread he ate in the morning isn't digesting well. They ask if he would like some water or milk, adding that if he has it with some honey, he will feel better. One maid questions why he ate barley bread in the first place when white bread is available to him. Abel explains that he wants to help out during the festival, so they need to eat all the grain left before the harvest. However, the Baroness has instructed the maids to give Abel all the clothes and food he needs. When Abel barely touches one of the maids' hands, they all blush, some even upset that it wasn't them. Michelle is adjusting clothing worn by Edwin, but says it will fit Abel with some adjustments. One maid comments that the clothes will look better on Abel than on Master Edwin. Suddenly, Edwin appears and questions if they really think the clothes will look better on Abel than on Edwin. Edwin, angered, demands to know why his clothes are here. While he glares at Abel, the maids inform him that they are preparing a tailcoat for him. Edwin becomes infuriated, and his vision blurs. All he can see is Abel. He grits his teeth and calls Abel a leech. Enraged, he shoves Abel away and questions if they are really making a tailcoat for a mere commoner. He demands to know who told Abel that he could attend the banquet. The maids and butlers begin noticing Edwin's behavior. Edwin explains that he used to get rid of cow dugs and plow fields, and now that he's held a sword, does he think he's different? He whispers if Abel really thinks he won because Patrick went easy on him. For a moment, Abel lowers his gaze, staring at the ground, but then fiercely looks into Edwin's eyes. This only enrages Edwin more, causing veins to bulge on his face and inside his ears. In a fit of anger, Edwin slaps Abel in the face. He tells Abel that he could never be a knight, even if he replaced his blood 100 times, as his origin will never change. Suddenly, one of the servants declares that the order for Abel's tailcoat came from the Baroness. Abel remains silent. Edwin, embarrassed, notices the maids whispering that he's only making a scene because he's angry at Abel, a behavior that has become increasingly embarrassing. Realizing that he's surrounded, Edwin freezes but quickly flings a vase at one of the maids, missing by inches. As he storms off, he comments that Abel got lucky. He walks past the maids and butlers, who are watching him, and furiously asks if they think this is some sort of show. When he leaves, they wonder what's wrong with him. Just yesterday, Edwin was telling Abel to greet him properly, and now Abel's mere presence seems to enrage him. The staff concludes that Abel is nice and quiet, so it's clear Edwin is taking things too far. His behavior is pathetic for a noble. Lawrence arrives and notes that things are quite complicated here. Later, Edwin complains to his mother, who nonchalantly remarks that all Abel is going to do is serve him. "So what's the problem?" Edwin exclaims. "What kind of whipping boy in the world eats at the same table as their master?" He insists that Abel should be eating leftover bread in the back of the kitchen, so why is he dressed like a noble or even a farmer? His mother fixes her makeup and tells him not to be like that. She reminds him that Abel is going to be working under him one day, so it's better for him to learn as much as possible ahead of time. In a fit of rage, Edwin plans to become the master of the house and beat Abel until he passes out, then kick him out of the castle. He's especially furious that Abel blocked Patrick's attack and about what Patrick said regarding obeying Abel's orders. Suddenly, Edwin bumps into Campbell, who questions why Edwin isn't watching where he's going, as it's not refined behavior. This irritates Edwin, who didn't want to see Campbell at the moment. Campbell comments on how a commoner conduct himself better than Edwin. Edwin snaps back, telling Campbell to go suck up to Abel instead. Campbell notices that Edwin's behavior is worsening by the day. Edwin believes that everyone has fallen for Abel. Patrick, Campbell, and even his mother are all on Abel's side. His father, the most powerful person in the castle, has never met Abel, but Edwin wonders what his father truly thinks. His father isn't in the right state of mind to do anything at the moment. Later, Campbell teaches Abel some simple basics. He tells him, "Do not be conceited, even if you are brave. Do not be arrogant, even if you are smart. Do not show off, even if you are rich." The author of the book they are referencing claimed that these are the 6 virtues to becoming one with good and saving humanity. Campbell glances at Abel and comments that the reason the author wrote this book at the end of his years was to criticize the empire. At that time, there was much debate about spirituality. Some believed that when someone is born, they inherit the original sin the moment they receive a body. On the other hand, some followers of another philosophy believed that people have the strength to overcome the original sin within them, that people can save themselves without God. Many who supported these ideas were executed as heretics. The debate revolves around whether the body and soul are one, and why certain acts against the body are considered virtuous. They claim that brave people become conceited when they are brave, and smart people become arrogant when they are smart. So, why is human nature regarded as inherently flawed? His teacher tells him that it's because humans are full of sin the moment they are born. Abel lowers his head and sighs, which surprises his teacher, as he wouldn't expect such a reaction from him. Embarrassed, Abel apologizes and explains that it's because of his situation. That's all. He remembered Edwin. Talented people tend to be the target of envy and jealousy. That's the way the world works. He had hoped that people with virtues would at least be honest. Campbell, however, nods in agreement. Suddenly, Abel informs Campbell that he's worried he won't survive long enough to become an adult. Campbell questions why he would say such a thing, and Abel reveals that he overheard Edwin talking as he passed by his room. Edwin said he would beat Abel to the end of his life, bury him under the castle, and use him as manure. This horrifies Campbell. Abel continues, saying that right now he has Campbell and the Baroness likes him, so he's fine, but if Edwin becomes Lord, who knows what will happen. As a result, Campbell declares that he will write Abel a certificate of identification. Abel is shocked and can't believe it. Campbell continues, explaining that while the Baroness is here, everything is fine, but if he leaves and can no longer look after him, Abel must leave the barony and go to the city. There is a free city called Salifa nearby, and Campbell knows a merchant there. With his recommendation, Abel will be given a job. Abel doesn't know how to thank him, but Campbell tells him to forget it. He doesn't want anything in return, only for Abel to send him a letter later to say he's alive. Campbell leaves the room, and Abel lowers his head, laughing hysterically. He looks at the ceiling, his eyes turning red. On St. Erachiel's day, nobles gathered at the banquet, enjoying a feast. Suddenly, the attention of the ladies present is caught by the Baroness entering with Abel. She walks in with pride, thanking everyone for coming. The ladies comment on how radiant she looks. They gossip, speculating that Abel is too young to be her lover. Abel glances at one of the ladies with his striking blue eyes, causing her to blush immediately. The other ladies seem to fall in love at first sight. Upon seeing this, Edwin starts drinking to control himself. He glances to his side and notices a fat man blushing and mumbling to himself. He wonders why the priest is so flustered. The priest, breathing heavily, thinks that Abel is beautiful. Meanwhile, Lawrence watches Abel with disgust. Since people thought religious celebrations should be kept simple, the banquet is small. They raise their cups to the Apostle of Heaven, the fifth servant of the light, the great angel Erachiel. After the Baron's toast, it is Baldwin's turn. Afterward, Priest Marcus says a prayer. Lawrence, who sees Abel, thinks that he is definitely a rare beauty, especially for the countryside, though he's still a boy. Abel glances at Lawrence with a cold expression, which surprises Lawrence slightly, but Abel quickly looks away. Lawrence wonders if their eyes had just met. Baldwin declares that he is glad everyone is in good health, commenting that Bishop Newton's blessings must have reached this land as well. With a cold expression, Patrick exclaims that they are grateful. Baldwin continues, saying that the temple always works hard for the parish's stability and prosperity. However, he also explains that Bishop Nathan is saddened by the terrible tragedy that happened within the parish. 13 years ago, a respected commander in Loxolem lost all his soldiers and returned to their home with only one knight. Patrick exclaims that most of them did not even pretend to listen to them, but then, he doesn't know what they expect him to say. Baldwin explains that the temple didn't ignore them on purpose. They had to consider their relationship with Sicart. It was hectic in the capital at the time, especially when a servant was pregnant with a noble's child, which had upset the queen. They are people who follow the words of heaven but are oddly interested in what happened on this land. Baldwin, frustrated, exclaims that they understand, don't they? He recalls how everything started wriggling and began devouring everything. That's how tens of knights and hundreds of soldiers disappeared. It might be easy for the royals and the temple to think of it as a ridiculous story. Suddenly, Patrick hits the table, causing it to shake and making Baldwin jump in shock. Patrick questions if Baldwin is accusing him of lying, reminding him that they appealed so many times and were ignored. Geoffrey comments that they couldn't ignore it any longer because of how often the strange occurrences have reappeared. Lawrence interjects, mentioning that in Olam, the remains of young men and women were found, and their clothes were missing. Edwin sarcastically asks if they had a diddler party. At this point, Edwin's mother tells him to go back to his room, but Edwin protests, saying he is 15 years old and knows everything already. Geoffrey, however, raises his hand, telling his wife to leave Edwin alone. It's time he hears the truth. Lawrence continues, explaining that in the area, no one discriminated against whom they copulated with men with women, men with men, and women with women. The Baroness, Edwin's mother, exclaims, asking the light to forgive them. Patrick demands to know what this has to do with the incident from 13 years ago. Lawrence explains that the temple suspects a supernatural force is behind the recent occurrences, similar to what was suspected during the Battle of Kaidan 13 years ago. An ominous feeling fills the room. When they investigated the village, they discovered snakes mating with chickens, cats birthing mice, and toads incubating centipede eggs near the well. Edwin's mother becomes lightheaded, pleading for the light to save the cursed land. Geoffrey notices his wife trembling and orders Abel to take her to her room. Abel goes to assist her, but Baldwin suggests that Edwin should take care of her instead. Edwin refuses, thinking they were just starting to talk about interesting things. Baldwin insists that since his mother fainted, it's only fitting that Edwin helps her, as her son. Reluctantly, Edwin and Abel assist his mother out of the room. Baldwin declares that now that the Baroness has left her seat, Abel can help with something else.